Hello everyone. This is not a story for the faint of heart. Today, we will be stepping into the darkness of the most gruesome cases, where evil not only exists, but also leaves bloody and haunting traces. This is Real Gruesome Murder Cases, a series of true stories about murders that made the whole world shudder. If you are ready to face the cold truth and the gruesome corners of humanity, come with me to delve deeper into each case, masterpiece of malice. In the bowels of a towering skyscraper that touched the clouds, in a room devoid of natural light, sat Japheth, a man whose fingers danced over the keyboard like a pianist lost in the throes of a concerto. With a pair of silver-framed glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, Japheth peered into the bright screen before him. Surrounding him were his colleagues, collectively known as the Warriors, each a genius in their own right, defending a massive financial empire from the dark underbelly of the digital world. The company they worked for managed the assets and transactions of millions, safeguarding the economic backbone of numerous nations. This was a responsibility the Warriors did not take lightly. Yet, for all their collective brilliance, none were quite like Japheth. He had an artist's soul, finding beauty in the complex interweaving of code lines, seeing symphonies in the arrangement of algorithms. To him, code was not just functional, it was beautiful. On a particularly quiet afternoon, as the Warriors went about their business, something caught Japheth's eye, a flicker in a subsystem that shouldn't flicker, a minuscule anomaly in the vast web of data traffic that flowed through the servers. He paused, adjusting his glasses, his fingers momentarily frozen above the keys. Then, with a flurry of keystrokes, he isolated the section of code responsible for the irregularity. His eyes widened. The code was ingenious, an awe-inspiring masterpiece of layered algorithms, cryptographic obfuscations, and data manipulations. Yet, it was malicious, designed to siphon off minute fractions of transactions, accumulating them into an offshore account. It was as beautiful as it was dangerous, a digital dragon hiding in the complex labyrinth of financial transactions. Japheth should have felt outrage, maybe even a surge of warrior-like adrenaline to slay this dragon. But he felt none of that. Instead, he felt a pang of admiration. Could one admire the craftsmanship of a weapon designed for harm? "Everything okay, Japheth?" asked Alara, one of the Warriors and the team's cryptography expert. She had an intuitive sense when something was amiss. "I've found something," he said cautiously. "Something extraordinary, but malevolent." Alara rolled her chair over to Japheth's terminal and scanned the displayed code. Her eyes narrowed. "This is the most advanced piece of malware I've ever seen. It's beautiful." "That's just it," Japheth replied. "It's too beautiful to simply exterminate. This code, the dragon, let's call it, is like a rare species discovered in the wild. It's incredible, Alara. It feels wrong to simply destroy it." She looked at him, understanding the conflict that stirred in his soul. "Japheth, it's stealing from people." I know. He cut her off. "I'm not saying we let it continue. I'm saying, can we convert it? Use its elegance for something good?" Alara sighed. "That's risky, and you know it. Besides, we'd need to trace it back to its source, figure out its origin." Japheth looked back at the screen, contemplating. The dragon had probably accumulated a small fortune by now, sitting in an account somewhere, untouchable. In an odd way, the dragon was the epitome of the greed and avarice their financial institution sometimes perpetuated. Could they use it as a force for good? Suddenly, an idea dawned on him. What if they could repurpose the dragon to serve the public good while catching the original creator red-handed? What if they could turn this artwork of maliciousness into a masterpiece of justice? The dragon was a dilemma, a moral and aesthetic quandary. It was the epitome of what Japheth loved and loathed about his work. Beautiful code used for ugly deeds. He looked at Alara, resolve solidifying in his eyes. We have to try. If we don't, we're just as bad as the person who created it. She met his gaze and nodded. All right, let's cage the dragon and see if we can turn it into a guardian angel. As Japheth's fingers returned to the keyboard, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was a warrior, yes, but also a coder, an artist at heart. And artists don't destroy art, they transform it. He began the arduous process of dissecting the dragon, peeling back layers of code as if they were scales, seeking to understand its fiery breath and its majestic wings. As his fingers wove new commands into the old algorithms, Japheth felt as if he were part of something larger, a symphony of chaos and harmony, code and conscience. It was a delicate task, full of risks and unknowns. But if it worked, they would not only have thwarted one of the most sophisticated financial crimes in history, but they would have also transformed a weapon of greed into a tool of justice. The dragon's fate now lay in Japheth's hands, poised between destruction and redemption, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like a true warrior, armed not just with skill, but with the moral fiber that transformed mere code into something profoundly, deeply human. Japheth spent days in a complex dance with the dragon. His screen was a blur of recoded algorithms, tested and retested to ensure they did exactly what he intended. He had convinced the warriors and even upper management to allow him the time to train the dragon, to harness its code for something beneficial. With each keystroke, he refocused the dragon's intent, directing it to identify vulnerabilities within their own systems, gaps that other malicious entities could exploit. It would be a guardian angel, albeit one birthed from malevolent genius. Alara was beside him every step of the way, providing the cryptographic lock that would contain the dragon and ensure its transformed code could only be used for their defined purposes. Finally, after endless cups of coffee and sleepless nights, they had done it. The dragon was tamed, its complexity now a force for good, patrolling the data corridors and alerting them to the weakest links. It was the network's newfound guardian, designed to protect rather than plunder. Still, there was the matter of the dragon's creator. Despite their efforts to trace back the malware's steps, the person behind it remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. Funds that were diverted remained in limbo, untraceable and untouchable, hidden away through a complex web of cryptocurrency transactions and offshore accounts. Whoever had made this was not only skilled, but exceedingly careful. They left no trace, no signature, nothing that gave away their identity. I can't believe we can't find him, Alara said, frustration lacing her words as they looked at the final report. The dragon was a piece of genius, but it's as if it sprang into existence out of nowhere. Japheth nodded, equally puzzled and annoyed. He wanted to meet the person who could conceive such a masterpiece, understand what drove them to use such brilliance for nefarious purposes. Some artists prefer anonymity, their work speaking for them, he mused. Yeah, but this is one artist who deserves to be behind bars, Alara added. Weeks passed, and the transformed dragon proved invaluable. It flagged 3 potential vulnerabilities within the first month, each of which could have led to catastrophic breaches. It was a win for the warriors, And yet, a sense of incompleteness nagged at Japheth. Then one day, as he sifted through flagged data, he saw it. A message hidden deep within layers of encryption, appearing as an anomaly within an anomaly. It was the equivalent of a digital whisper, something so subtle it could easily be overlooked. But it wasn't overlooked, not by Japheth. The message read, "A dragon's nature is to be free. Yet, you've caged it, transformed it. Interesting. It's not often one finds a worthy opponent." Japheth felt a shiver run down his spine. The creator knew. He wanted to reply, to communicate with this enigmatic entity, but as quickly as the message had appeared, it was gone, swallowed up by the digital ether. A one-time anomaly that their systems could not trace. "He knows we changed it," Japheth said to Alara, recounting the discovery. "And he respects it in his own twisted way." "Or he's mocking us because we couldn't catch him," she countered. "Maybe it's both," Japheth mused. The dragon's creator remained elusive, but his creation now served a noble purpose. Japheth often wondered if they would ever cross paths again in some future dance of code and intent. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose, pondering the complexities of human nature and the even more complex realm of ethical code. They had won a battle, but not the war. The dragon was tamed, but its creator still lurked in the shadows of cyberspace. As he looked at his screen, at the elegant lines of code that now served to protect rather than harm, Japheth felt both accomplishment and a strange sense of gratitude. For it was in the depths of the dragon's malevolent beauty that he found an opponent worthy of his skill, a complex riddle to solve, and, most importantly, a way to transform something harmful into something good. His eyes moved to the flickering cursor, an ever-present reminder that every end is also a beginning. The world of code was vast and filled with both demons and angels, but for now, the dragon was one of the angels. And so, in the company of warriors, with the shadow of an elusive adversary stretching from some unknown corner of the internet, Japheth continued to seek the beauty in code, forever vigilant, forever in awe of the dual nature of his digital world, a ghost's testimony. After the living and the dead decided to merge worlds, the Supreme Court was flooded with appeals. With coexist being a hot topic in the first half of the 21st century, most people thought it would be a great idea to create a union between the two worlds. They thought they'd get their loved ones back. They thought they'd get access to generational wisdom from their deceased elders back, and perhaps some old family recipes could finally resurface. People could only think of the missing pieces in their lives that they wanted to finally have sewn up with the help of a familiar, ghostly face around. It was an oversight, to say the least, that with ghosts being almost as accessible as the living, there would now be witnesses for crimes where before there had been none. It actually caused a lot of chaos across the criminal justice system, especially for police officers who had tampered with evidence to shut a case quickly, for gang members who'd offed witnesses to shut their mouths. And it was a goddamn headache for judges who had to reopen every murder case from the last several decades that now suddenly had a victim who could tell their side of the story. But for Jeremy Strout, it was a lifeline. He'd been sitting on death row for 15 years after being convicted of 4 heinous murders, his wife, and 3 children. At the time of his conviction, there'd been no one there to defend him, just whispers from neighbors who'd said they'd heard him yelling in his house hours before the bodies were discovered. It didn't help that he was the one who'd called 911 and then was found at the scene of the crime covered in their blood. It didn't help that he'd sought out anger management before in his past. Rumors swam through town like a broken dam, neighbors speculating that he hadn't wanted their third child, that little Harley Sue was a mistake Mrs. Strout made Jeremy keep, and that he'd finally snapped under the pressure of 3 small children and a wife whose fertility had betrayed him. Jeremy had always denied the rumors, claiming that he loved his family. Sure, they had their problems, and he never denied the hardship of not only providing for 3 children under 5, but living under the same roof as them. Nevertheless, he remained adamant in his defense. He would never harm them. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough. Statistically, said the prosecutor, people are more likely to be killed by their spouse than any other person in the world. And of course, Mr. Strout could not leave his children to live after killing Mrs. Strout, because who would take care of the children while he was at work? And if he had not done it, then why so much blood, not only on his clothes, but in his fingernails, wedged between eyebrow hairs and in the wrinkles of his temples? And the even bigger question, if Mr. Strout had not murdered his family, then who did? There had never been another suspect. The police never really took the time to consider one, their minds made up before they could produce an alternative. It really was easier just to blame the husband. What jury wouldn't go for that? Today, our jury gets to hear a new side to the story. Jeremy's defense attorney told the courtroom at his appeal hearing, nearly 2 decades after his family's murders. From Mrs. Strout's perspective, Mr. Alcott enticed the crowd with a smile that said he had a secret, one he was eager to share. Attorneys could be a bit performative in their speeches, and Mr. Alcott was no less confident. The union between the dead and the living truly did save some attorneys' careers, as it had not always been every day that they could produce eyewitness testimony that could turn a case on its heel. Some started getting big heads about it, as if they had more power than the judges, and Mr. Alcott's once regular-shaped head was slowly growing in size. Jeremy, who'd known him since his family's gruesome deaths, knew that Mr. Alcott came from a humble and passionate place. He just wanted to help people. And more than anything on this day, he wanted to help Jeremy. The only problem with ghosts as witnesses was time. The worlds were combined, yes, ghosts were all around. But time for the living and time for the dead, they existed on 2 separate lines, intersecting at points that were not always convenient. Ghosts floated from here to there to here, teleporting across space and time. And their biggest adjustment to being reunited with the living was adhering to the old 3rd-dimensional clock. You could not simply tell a ghost to show up in court at 9 a.m. and expect them to find where that time existed for them. The closest thing living humans had to relate this ghostly state of nonlinear existence was to elderly people with dementia. They hopped from place to place, time to time, without any real sense of how they got there. Ghost therapists, a new occupation created by the psychologists, blended a team of living and dead to try to help condition ghosts into grasping the concept of earthly time. But like any therapy, it was not an immediate remedy. Realistically, Mr. Alcott could only hope that Mrs. Strout would appear in court. But there was no way to be certain she would find her way there at the right time and place of the court hearing. Yet still, he spoke as if there were not a single doubt in his mind. Today, we will get to hear an eyewitness account of the events that took place on October 26, 2023, from one of the victims' perspectives. And how grateful are we that it is now possible. Mr. Alcott turned to face Jeremy Strout, seated at the defense table, shackled at his wrists and ankles, both sets of chains locked in place by a hook on the tabletop and the floor. Jeremy was trembling, just as nervous as he was during his first trial, which certainly had not helped his case. He tapped his feet anxiously, and Mr. Alcott took his seat beside him. "Don't you worry, Jeremy. I've spoken to Mrs. Strout, and I know she wants to be here. She feels just awful that all of this has fallen on you. I have no doubt she will find her way here, even with those kids of yours keeping her busy. Who'd have thought dead kids could still be such a handful?" "Ah!" Jeremy didn't laugh, so Mr. Alcott cleared his throat. "She's got a wonderful therapist, Jeremy. They've been working really hard on timeliness so she can be here for you today. He's the best therapist around. He worked so hard when he was alive it nearly killed him. Ha, ha. But really, it was the alcohol that did it." Despite Mr. Alcott's poor humor, his assurances did give Jeremy hope. After all, that was all he had left. The courtroom remained mostly silent as the hours carried on, everyone waiting, now accustomed to the concept of ghostly testimonies, and also of their inability to make prompt appearances. If people had thought court cases dragged on before, waiting on a dead person to show up had made the old ways seem swift. Every so often, as the clock ticked, a ghost would find themselves in the pews alongside the other patient attendees, causing a stir in the crowd. An elderly man piped up around the second long hour, reminiscing. "I remember when they built this courthouse in 1949. Apparently, he had been a little boy with a dream of becoming the president one day. At the time, fascinated by the building's exterior columns and interior mahogany. On the third hour, a child ghostling chased a ball around the courtroom, giggling about how his dad used to work upstairs. On the fourth hour, a former janitor peeked his head in to see if the garbage needed to be changed. It was the fifth hour when the judge, who had spent nearly all of the hours engrossed in a book, announced that if Mrs. Strout did not find her way here in 10 minutes, her testimony would have to be rescheduled and the court would be adjourned. Jeremy's foot resumed its tapping. Mr. Alcott nudged him, winking. "She'll be here." Jeremy's hope was nearly run dry when the clock struck 5 hours and 11 minutes since the court hearing was set to start. The banging from the judge's gavel was still resounding, while a symphony of people gathering their things and sighing at the wasted day trickled across the room. All of it was at just the perfect volume for Mrs. Strout's meager voice to almost be missed. Almost. "Hello?" she said. "Hello? Did I make it on time?" The noise in the room was like a faucet sputtering out until it finally stilled. Everyone froze in their tracks and turned towards the voice to find an equally meager and transparent figure seated at the witness stand. When Jeremy laid eyes on her, she looked as beautiful as the day he married her. Not appearing in the form in which one died was a feature of ghosthood that all appreciated. "Senora," Jeremy whispered. At her name, the ghost frantically searched for its source. When she landed on Jeremy, relief softened and warmed her face. "Jeremy." She smiled. Then, as if her reason for being here suddenly rushed to her mind, she jerked towards the judge, who was still frozen in his half-standing, half-seated stance, considering if he should allow this hearing to take place. "Your Honor, you have to set him free. He's innocent. Please," she pleads. "Senora, where are the kids?" Jeremy asked worriedly. His ghastly wife faced him again. "They're fine, dear. Well, they're dead, but they're fine. They're at the park, playing." Jeremy thought of little Harley Sue, not even 2 when she passed, off at the park playing without an adult. Senora read his expression. "I figure not much else can happen to them now." She shrugged, forcing a laugh. Mr. Alcott, who was already up on his feet, cleared his throat and approached the judge's bench, nodding a hello to Mrs. Strout. "Your Honor?" Would you please allow Mrs. Strout to give her testimony? We've waited all this time, and if we prolong it any further, we cannot guarantee her appearance again." The judge was tired and hungry and ready to sit on his couch and kick his feet up, but he was also reasonable. He surrendered a sigh. All right, Mr. Alcott," court reinstated. He tapped his gavel, and the jurors all groaned as they found their seats again. "Make it quick, Mrs. Strout. We had all day, but that day is nearly gone." Mr. Alcott turned to Jeremy, giving him 2 thumbs up. Jeremy released all of the air he was holding on to. Mrs. Strout nodded and straightened in her seat, running her hands across her lap as if to flatten her dress. Out of habit, most ghosts seemed to retain this gesture. Mrs. Strout inhaled before she spoke. "The day I died, there was a harvest moon on the rise. The children were loud, and the house was a mess, and the fridge was nearly empty. I hadn't gotten to laundry in over a week. It was a pretty typical day in our house, actually," Mrs. Strout joked. Only a few in the room offered an empathetic laugh. The judge was less patient. "Mrs. Strout, while I have sympathy for your tragic death and the death of your 3 children, you are here to tell us if it was that man, Mr. Jeremy Strout, who did it. We do not need a bedtime story." Jeremy flinched at another man telling his wife what to do. "Let her speak." The judge shot him a daring gaze. Mr. Alcott squeezed his shoulder. Senora thanked him with her eyes, but behind them was a painful secret rising to the surface. "Of course, Your Honor. I know I've already taken up a lot of your time," she said, addressing the whole courtroom full of people. Then she looked down at her lap, twiddling her fingers. "The truth is, my children and I were killed by one of their parents." A gasp echoed across the walls of the room, and an uproar of whispers scattered like static. Mr. Alcott and Jeremy shared a confused stare. The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" Everyone started to hush, but it wasn't until Senora shouted that silence fully resumed. "But it wasn't Jeremy!" Senora was crying now, looking directly at her husband. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. Jeremy's foot stopped bouncing. His mind was trying to solve an impossible puzzle. All these years, people had assumed he had murdered his entire family. But the truth was, he honestly didn't know what had happened to them. Just like he'd told the police, he'd come home from a long day at work and walked into the most horrific and life-shattering scene he'd ever witnessed. No one believed him. Senora's sobs were the only sound in the courtroom as everyone patiently waited for her to collect herself. Thankfully, Kleenex had developed a ghost-friendly facial tissue, and one of the guards brought it over to her. She wiped her eyes and spoke sternly, as if she had not just been wailing with abandon. "Your Honor, you need to release my husband from prison right now." "What are you saying, Senora?" Jeremy whispered. The next words that Jeremy's wife spoke were undeniably the most important of his entire life. More life-altering than the ones spoken by the police who arrested him and the judge who convicted him. Senora's words freed Jeremy Strout from a prison death sentence and cleared his name of all criminal charges. But in the same instance, her words shackled him all over again, leaving him forever haunted by the truth. Farmhouse dinner. Christina wondered how long she should wait before she reported her husband missing. 2 days seemed too soon, but a week too long. Who would take a whole week to notice their husband missing? She held her hot cocoa in both hands, sipping it slowly as she watched the gentle flakes drifting through the pine trees. The first cold snap of the season had come with several inches of snow, and it covered the ground in a white, soft blanket. She loved being alone in her kitchen, and had spent the morning rearranging her utensils, the pots, and her knives for practical use. Everything had a place, and a place for everything. Christina looked around her small house, the contour of her entire world. She didn't miss him. The house felt lighter, cleaner since he walked out the door that last time. Did she even want him back in her life? She frowned. She had to get back to work. Mick's words rang in her head. "Stop standing, get working." Mick couldn't abide her standing still. Everyone and everything on the farm had to have a use. Mick, of course, accepted. He could sit around and drink, complaining the world had it in for him. She put on Mick's thick flannel jacket, much better than her own, only slightly too large, and checked on the chickens, tossing seeds to them, then the few sheep, all safe in the barn. She looked around at what needed fixing, potential improvements. New opportunities for the old equipment clicked through her mind, adding to the long list. She lifted a bale of hay high to drop in the feed chute. The years of farm labor had made her body strong. Once back inside, she looked in the refrigerator. The meat she had pulled out from the deep freezer had thawed, and so she added spices, putting it in the oven with yellow potatoes and peas. She wiped the clean, pristine counter, then looked around at the sparkling kitchen, frowning at the lingering cigarette smoke smell, still recognizable underneath the pine sol she had dosed the room with. It had been 3 days since Mick had walked out of the door, and that seemed about right. She sat down at the kitchen table in front of the phone on the wall, smoothed her faded blue gingham dress as if they could see her, then called the police. "My husband Mick is missing," she said, surprised at the real tears rolling down her cheek. She did miss Mick, his warm body and his gentle laugh. She missed him like she missed being a little girl when she would wear pretty dresses, dreamt of a prince to marry, and her future loomed bright on the horizon. Except those days were gone, just like Mick. What if they actually found him? She had new dreams now. Coffee, officers, or hot cocoa, maybe. Christina's voice met the officers as they walked into her warm kitchen, a powder of snowflakes on their dark uniform jackets. They introduced themselves as they came in. Detective Sergeant John Maloney. Tall and thick with a jaw like a dump truck, he stomped his feet on the stoop before ducking into the house. Behind him, slight and pretty, with her blonde hair pulled back tight in a bun, Officer Kelly Marks stepped inside. "That's quite a road to get here. Lucky we had my 4x4 Bronco. Your little Jap car would have never made it through." D.S. Maloney's voice boomed in the small house, looking over at Officer Marks, who just grimaced at the repeated joke. "Thanks." D.S. Maloney took a coffee, and Officer Marks took a hot cocoa, with a grace he has. "I speak English." "So, you are Christina Santos, and you called about a missing person. A Mickey Mouse, maybe?" D.S. Maloney laughed with both thick hands on his hips, his elbows waving, the international flags of asshole. D.S. Maloney snorted at his joke. Both women's eyes stayed on the floor. "His name was Mick," Christina said in a low voice. "Mick, your husband, has been missing." Officer Marks looked down at a small, pristine notebook. "For 3 days?" "Yes." Christina wiped her eyes with her apron. "Mick went out, said he wanted to get something from town, but his truck is still here. Sometimes he goes to a neighbor's house, or the bar in town. Oh, I don't know." Christina clenched her apron over and over. "Did you look for him, or call anyone?" D.S. Maloney barked. "I don't know who to call. I don't know his friends, other than the men at the Iron Door in town. I called the bar, but he wasn't there." "Okay, do you have a description?" Officer Marks held her pen at the ready. We can call the local hospitals, other police stations to see if he has turned up. Well, he's a bit taller than me, has dark hair and thicker. She put her arms out, forming a large belly. And his face? Christina squinted one eye closed and turned her face into a deep scowl. Oh. Office Marks turned away with a frown. Mean mug. Any idea where he could be? D.S. Maloney looked in a cupboard, as if the missing man had been put with the canned peaches instead of the tins of sardines. Maybe he was walking in the forest, chasing a dog or a deer, and he fell and broke his leg. Christina mimed her leg collapsing, hopping, and then in the snow. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. Or a wolf got him. Her strong hands turned into a biting wolf, attacking Officer Marks's arm, who leapt back from the snarling, yapping fingers. But most likely, he'd just run off, tired of me. Christina's chin fell into her chest. D.S. Maloney and Officer Marks caught each other's eyes. I'll check outside. You look around in here. D.S. Maloney leaned into Christina's face. It's okay we look around, right? Nothing to hide? Officer Marks meandered through the house, rubbing her finger on a shelf, and then looking at her dustless glove. She opened a tall door in the kitchen, then her eyes went wide. She pulled a broom out of the closet. What's this? D.S. Maloney walked back in. The new snow covered any possible evidence. I found the meat freezer. You're well stocked for the winter, so that's good. I didn't see much else. Officer Marks held up a well-used broom with dark red coloring on the end of the handle. My broom, Christina offered. Is this blood? D.S. Maloney took the broom, his eyes blazing. Sometimes. Christina's hands squeezed her apron against sharing her secret shame. Mick used that if the kitchen wasn't clean enough. Officer Marks looked around the kitchen with her eyes raised. We're going to test this for blood. You want to change your story? No, you can see. Christina pulled her hair back to show a gash, dried blood still dotting the wound. I cleaned up the rest. She collapsed in a chair. Mick used to be helpful, but we lost so many sheep with the scrapie outbreak. Then with his drinking, I wasn't allowed to leave, just work the farm. Mick wanted me to do so much, but he did nothing but drink and curse and hit. Christina fell into deep sobs, her face in her apron. He just wasn't any use, don't you see? D.S. Maloney looked away, then his nose lifted into the air. Well, that smells good. What is that? Christina looked up. That's dinner. I thawed some meat. I needed to cook it. She stood up and looked in the oven. It's done now. I can't eat it all. I had hoped Mick would come home for dinner, but... Christina pulled a long roast out of the oven, the meat pulling back from the bone. Rosemary and thyme filled the kitchen with the aromas from the well-cooked meat. Do you want some? We can't let anything go to waste on a farm. D.S. Maloney looked at Christina, his eyes narrow, and then smiled. Heck yeah, I'm starving. Sitting at the table, he had a large napkin tucked into his shirt collar, a knife in one hand, a fork in the other. We can't do any more searching now. It is too dark and cold. He belched, loudly. This is real good, by the way. I have an idea. He pointed his fork at Officer Marks. Back at the station you call around, hospitals, other police stations. I bet he's in someone's drunk tank sleeping off a bender. Good idea, sir. Officer Marks's eyes swept the ceiling before turning to Christina. I thought this would be lamb, since you have a sheep farm, but it is something different. Christina looked up. Her mouth dropped open before she clenched her teeth. Pig, she muttered. A little tough, but pretty good, I agree. She stood up and went to her refrigerator. I have more. She pulled out several bundles and rolled and taped butcher paper. Here is some ground meat. I can't use it all. You should take it. D.S. Maloney pulled off his napkin as he stood up and took the packages. We'll contact you when we have anything further. He nodded and left the kitchen. Officer Marks jumped up to follow D.S. Maloney outside. Sir, there was obviously a fight in that kitchen. I read a story once about a wife who killed her husband with a frozen lamb chop and then fed it to the officers who came to interview her. Do you think? D.S. Maloney narrowed his eyes at Officer Marks before shaking his head. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard of. There is no body. No, he just left. Not that I blame him. She's not all there. He spun his finger around his ear. Officer Marks stepped back inside. Christina stood at the sink, washing a large meat cleaver. We're going to go. Thanks for the meal. Officer Marks headed for the door, then turned back. You know, I had the craziest idea that you killed your husband with that meat you served us to get rid of the evidence. Christina's mouth dropped open. Oh, that would have been so much easier. Christina shook her head and leaned back into the sink to get to work on the dishes and her new life, not Mary. The unnerving chorus of cutlery scraping porcelain echoed throughout the room. Tension hung thick in the air, palpable enough to reach up and slice into it with my steak knife. Beside me, my sister sniffed. From my periphery, I could see her red-rimmed eyes staring blankly at her untouched plate. I cut into the slab before me, crimson juices forming a greasy puddle. I took a bite, relished the tenderness. The peas encroached into the sea of mashed potatoes like invading soldiers. Would you please pass the potatoes, Mary? Mother asked from the other end of the table. I nodded, heaving the dish over to my sister to pass on. Her gaze remained fixed on her plate as she sat on both hands, legs trembling. A small, choked sob escaped from her lips. That's quite enough, Leah, Father growled, stabbing into his own steak. Leah shakily grasped the bowl, ushering it to Mother. Between them sat Jonah, barely peeking over the edge of the table and pushing his food about. At the tender age of 5, he was blissfully ignorant. I chewed a bit of gristle in the next bite, watching Father's brow furrow as he took a sip of wine, a rogue tendril staining his snowy beard burgundy. He cleared his throat, an action which rendered the table still, waiting with bated breath. Children, the ultimate test is almost upon us. I hated the way he spoke, like that of an old novel. Mother rested a bony hand over his and listened intently. With her other hand, she fingered the gold cross hanging from her neck. We will not let the enemy destroy our union. We will not succumb to their devilish tendencies, for they are blind to the ways in which we serve him. They will never know such unwavering love and loyalty, and for that, I pity them. Mother nodded in understanding, her silvery bun bobbing. Father tossed his napkin over his plate and stood, chair screeching dully on concrete. We watched as he climbed the nearby staircase. Stray spots of maroon that had earlier leached into the wood marked his steps, evidence of what he'd done to protect the sanctity of his family. There was once a time when I would have chased after him, lunging for the open door, yearning for sunlight, but the scar on the back of my head itched like an ugly deterrent. I made it a point to constantly remind myself of who I was, where I came from. Fragments of memories, the way my mother used to rub my back in the morning when she woke me for school, the sound of my father's work shoes on the hardwood floors every evening, the hum of the fish tank in my childhood bedroom remained filed away in the depths of my mind, growing fuzzier with each passing day. but I dared not speak of these memories. They were mine and only mine. Leah, now gangly and naive in the throes of adolescence, was more pliable. I imagined she couldn't even recall things like the details of her mother's face or the way it felt to ride a school bus. When mother and father told her something, she accepted it at face value. And Jonah, in all his cherubic innocence, had never known another life. The harsh fluorescents were his sun and moon, every day the same. Sometimes it made me want to weep, but then I reminded myself he knew no different. Perhaps it was better that way. Father's thunderous descent broke my thoughts. Mother stood at his approach, collecting some of the equipment he came bearing. As he laid a piece before each of us, the breath caught in my throat. My eyes followed the transition from dark metal into laminated wood that led down to an unmistakable component, a trigger. Out of the children, only I knew how to operate a gun. When I was 8 years old, my father took me hunting for the first time. I recalled the way the cold seeped into my fingers and toes as we waited for hours. We flinched at any flicker of movement, which often turned out to be a rummaging squirrel. But then he arrived. Statuesque and bristled, his sinewy figure strutted into the open field, unaware of his armed audience. His antlers were a thorny crown that dipped with him as he scoured the earth. "Take the shot," my father egged, helping me hold the heavy rifle. We'd gone over the process an umpteen amount of times, but now the steely grip felt wrong. I dropped my shoulder, finger slipping from the trigger, as the barrel slung towards the ceiling of the tree stand, and my father cursed. That was the first time my father swore in front of me. In one swift motion, he grabbed the gun, took aim, and fired. I covered my ears and watched in silent horror as the creature's body quivered with the impact. His legs buckled, and he scrambled for a brief moment before taking off, blood spilling from his flank. My father took my shoulders in his hands and kneeled square before me. "You don't ever let the gun drop like that, especially with the safety off," he scolded. Hot tears coursed down my cheeks, stinging the wind-chapped skin. My father profusely apologized for swearing and raising his voice, wrapping me in a hug. But I wasn't crying because he yelled. I kept replaying the look of sheer panic as the bullet ripped through the deer's flesh, the terror and confusion he must have felt. We trailed our victim for a short while, following the blood-stained leaves of early winter. He didn't make it far, having collapsed in a small clearing. Panting laboriously, his onyx eyes stared up in blank defeat, and I saw myself in their reflection. Before I could process the scene, another shot rang out, and the deer stilled. "A kill shot," my father explained, "to end his suffering. When you see the enemy, you take the shot," Father said then, breaking my trance. I was back in my chair, staring down at the weapon before me. Leah ran a trembling finger over the safety, ensuring it was on per Father's crash course. Jonah, too small to wield such a device, was given a knife instead. Never before had we been permitted to use any kind of weaponry. Anything more than a butter knife was forbidden. Father and Mother claimed it was for our own safety, but I knew better. And that didn't stop me from fantasizing a ballpoint pen embedded in a windpipe, a broken bedpost as a club to the head. I'd had my fair share of time to ponder the possibilities. Leah and Jonah may have been taken at malleable ages, but I refused to fully yield. The slight quiver in Father's hands and the way Mother's complexion paled meant it was all hands on deck. Though I didn't know whose blood painted the staircase, sticky on the soles of Father's shoes, it had led us to such a cataclysm that I dared to dream about life beyond the concrete. I yearned to return to a world where my name was my own, not the one I'd been forced to adopt. I longed to hug my mother and father, to bask in the sunlight on a summer day, to see my friends, to witness the light at the end of a nearly decade-long tunnel. Could this be the end? The gunmetal was cool in my clammy palms. I contemplated aiming it at father or at mother. It would be so easy. But what if it wasn't loaded? What if it was just for show? And could I really do it? "Let us go," Father commanded, leading our ragtag troop up the stairs. At the top, Father unlatched the door, leading us into an empty hall with another door at its opposing end. Bringing up the rear, I glanced back into the abyss where time passed indefinitely, and as the next door opened into a moonlit room, I realized I would never allow myself to return. Gilded crosses glinted from every wall as we wound through the house, and like something from a movie, a muffled voice seeped in through the cracks in the windows and doors. "Come out with your hands up." "Father," Leah croaked. "Who is that?" Father ignored her, the click of his safety flipping off. He slung the gun around his back, nodding at Mother as he approached the door. The rush of blood thrummed in my ears. Leah mimicked Father and switched her safety off, and Mother did the same. Greasy coils of nausea knotted my gut as I followed their lead. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Nothing about the unfolding situation felt good or right or godly. Father gripped the doorknob with a fierceness and turned. Golden porch light flooded the entryway. For a moment, Father's face looked younger in the warm glow, and I wondered what led him to this path in life. Slowly, he raised his hands above his head and stepped outside. "Drop your weapon!" an extraneous voice shouted. "It's over, Arthur," another called. "Do the right thing and drop your weapon." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Father replied simply, as if he were declining an invitation to a party. "Your godlessness is a stain on this earth, and I have to protect my family from such evil. I can't let you destroy the Lord's work. You think you can interfere with his plan?" Disconcerted grumbles echoed as a reply. "Dear?" Father called. Mother, gun cradled in her arms, crept to his side. Her skin was sallow, brow damp with prickles of sweat. The woman, always so composed, seemed to be cracking. "Mrs. Goodfellow, drop your weapon now," the second voice commanded. Tensions heightened with each passing second. "Put down your weapon and put your hands up." Negotiations persisted, but I knew Mother was as stubborn as a mule and loyal as a dog. She would follow Father to the ends of the earth. The crunch of boots on gravel drew near. Father stiffened. "Not another step," he threatened, raising his gun. "Don't turn this into a standoff, Arthur," the voice urged. "That's not going to do either of us any good." A treacherous moment of silence ticked by. Every part of me trembled. "I will not let you tear this family apart," Father declared coldly. "Maud," he said, nodding at Mother, who lifted her gun. Her finger made contact with the trigger, and she pulled. A deafening blast ripped through the cool night air, and all hell broke loose. Shouts of anger and bewilderment erupted, and I watched as Mother's body lurched back in a swarm of bullets. In collapsing, her gun fired. I fell to the floor, covering the important parts of myself. Father crawled lamely over the threshold, dragging Mother's body with him. With a weak kick, he shut and locked the door. Blood from their matching wounds seeped into the floor, a crimson trail smeared behind them. Amidst the chaos, Father tenderly brushed stray hairs from Mother's face. He caressed her cheek in his calloused hand as she gasped for air, her blouse soaked through and the cross dangling from her neck now stained. Faint whispers of prayer spilled from his lips as he continued to comfort Mother. Barked orders swirled beyond the window panes, the thud of boots heavy on the porch. From the floor, I glanced around. Jonah was nowhere to be found. "Jonah?" I called quietly. "Leah, Jonah's not." I turned. Leah lay face down nearby, arms splayed by her sides and gun resting under the nearby sofa. "Leah?" On shaking limbs, I clawed my way over to her. Terror gripped my throat so viciously I struggled to breathe. Thick locks of brunette cascaded into the floor, shielding her face from view. I carefully grabbed her shoulder, rolling her over. A strangled cry escaped me as I recoiled at the sight. Blood trickled from her forehead down the bridge of her nose between lifeless eyes. The bile that earlier threatened to purge itself did so then. I wiped my mouth, one last dry heave racking my body, before curling up beside Leah. Garbled whispers across the room caught my attention, and I looked to see Father lying beside Mother, gazing up at the ceiling of the foyer. Though worse for wear, he still managed to recite the Lord's Prayer unfalteringly. Mother remained limp, devoid of life. "Mary?" Father called blindly, like a sick game of Marco Polo. "Mary, child, are you still there?" I rose, stepping gingerly until I stood over top of him. His snowy beard, once stained with wine, was now marred with fatal streaks of maroon. "She's dead," I said solemnly. "Leah's dead." I didn't want to reveal that Mother's gun misfiring was the cause. I wanted him to think it was his fault, which, truthfully, it was. Everything was his fault. Sometimes, we as servants of the Lord must make the ultimate sacrifice. "Shut up," I hissed, jabbing the barrel of my gun into his forehead. Father grew silent for a moment. "Mary, you are a daughter of the one true King," he rasped. "You are our last hope at ending the war of evil that has been waged against us. When you see the enemy, take the shot." I sniffed. "You're right, Father." His breathing was ragged, blood curdling in his lungs as we spoke. A twinge of sorrow panged my heart as I gazed down at the dying man before me. But then I remembered all the hurt he'd inflicted, all the years he'd stolen, and anger sizzled in my veins. Realization flashed across his face. "Mary." A single blast rang out, a kill shot to end his suffering. The footsteps and chatter outside ceased. For a moment, the world was silent. "My name's not Mary," I spat, dropping the gun. With a quick yank, I tore the gold cross from my neck, dropping it onto Father's still chest. A muffled cry emanated from somewhere close by. My heart clenched. "Jonah?" I called, wheeling around in search of the noise. I padded across the living room to the pantry where the cries seemed to stem from. Carefully, I turned the knob and opened the door. Head buried between his knees, Jonah sat curled in a ball. "Jonah?" I rubbed his back, and he glanced up. His eyes shone with tears. "Jonah, it's okay. I'm here." Just as the front door splintered open under the crack of a boot, I wrapped him in a hug. Faw family feud. Local missing children discovered in police raid after officer slain. Abducted children found in home of local religious leaders. My name's not Mary. Young woman's fight for survival in House of Horrors. A Christmas Day heist. "A grande whole milk latte and all the money in the cash register," Bernie said to the cashier, while pointing the gun at the barista. "Or the barista dies." People usually value other people's lives more than their own, or at least they should. The age 20s, something cashier's face was twitching. It was clear he had never been in a robbery before. Calgary is a safe city. Or at least it was before the people from Toronto started showing up. "Is this for real? Are you actually robbing the store?" the cashier said. "Does this gun look real to you?" Bernie allowed the cashier to have a good look at the cold, hard steel of the Glock G19. The cashier raised his hands. It felt good to watch other people do as they were told for a change. Behind Bernie, a woman's voice said, "That's not a good decision." "And why not?" Bernie sneered. "Full-fat milk. You should choose skim or soy." Bernie glanced around and saw a young woman with lightly bleached hair, that new style that gives women a zombie-like appearance. She was wearing a t-shirt with a cartoon figure on it. Definitely from Toronto, the weird ones are. Or Vancouver. "I didn't ask your opinion." The cashier behind the register said, "The grande full-fat latte comes to $7.99. Bernie pulled out a credit card, an action born out of habit, then put it back away. The robbery was not going the right way at all. "You are going to give me at least $500, Bernie demanded to the cashier. The girl with the bleached hair began talking over her shoulder again. "I'd like a half skinny flat white with a shot of hazelnut using my Starbucks bonus points." Firing a bullet into the ceiling would have made this robbery easier. Calgary police interview of suspect Bernie Schultz by Officer Ringenberg. Or, in your own words, explain to me what happened earlier today. BS. I usually drink coffee at Tim Hortons, so I thought it would be better to rob a Starbucks. Calgary is a big city, but this is Canada. People know each other. At Tim Hortons, no one ever gives feedback on what drink I'm ordering. Who let all the Starbucks open in Calgary anyway? It must have been those arseholes from Toronto. The same Torontonian arseholes who voted for Trudeau. How did I get here? One day, I was the site administrator of the biggest oil project in Alberta. The next day, global warming and electric vehicles means I've lost my job. Then I was dragged from my home by government thugs. They wore different uniforms than you, but were in uniform from my home. My brother, who helped me pack my things, said I needed to get used to change. "This is 2023, he said. "One door closes and another door opens," he says. My brother has a big mouth. At my new place in the sticks close to the forest, the fires worry me. I watch the news on CBC every night and have chats with my neighbor Ted about the fires. They didn't happen before. Not before Trudeau took over. Anyways, Ted says we need to fight the system. He said if we could get $500 together, we can drive to the Yukon and live in an abandoned cabin over the summer and get away from the lunatics in Calgary. Or, what's Ted's last name? BS. Bennett. 2 N's and 2 T's. So back to the story. Since Trudeau took over, everything is about pointing out other people's mistakes. People are always telling me what words I'm not supposed to say anymore. Well, thank God some things stay the same. Once a week, me and Ted walk to the Tim Hortons nearby. Even Timmy's didn't have a Christmas tree this year. But that's not going to stop Bernie from having the spirit of Christmas. At that other place, people just wouldn't listen to a woman with a gun. I wanted to shoot a bullet into the ceiling to stop them all yammering. And then you all came in. OR. Thank you, Bernie. That's all we need today. We're still collecting evidence. Before I start shooting, there's something I'd like to say, Bernie announced. I hope you have a Merry Christmas. She turned from the cashier to the barista. And you too. Merry Christmas. Ma'am, here's your latte and have a Merry Christmas, the cashier said. Then he added, I don't usually say that, and looked at the other people listening in the store. They had stopped talking to each other and were paying attention closely, in the way every high school teacher dreams of. Bernie gave everyone present a stern look, one that showed she meant business. Her arm was getting tired. She forgot how heavy guns were. The cashier had been holding his hands up for quite a while and was getting tired too. "Sorry, ma'am. I can't give you all the money in the cash register," he said slowly and calmly, "because this is a cashless store." His eyeballs moved back and forth between Bernie and the sign next to the cash register. It said, "This is a cashless store." Bernie groaned. "It's because of those people from Toronto again." "I'm from Calgary," the cashier explained. Bernie didn't know how to respond to that. "Doesn't your son come in here?" the cashier asked. Bernie realized at that moment she should have worn a disguise. Outside, flashing red lights appeared. Bernie watched with concern as police cars filled the parking lot. The cashier, in a kind voice, the tone a person might use to give a suggestion to a friend that the color of his sweater doesn't match his pants, said, "They might shoot you if you're holding that gun. It doesn't matter what age you are." As Bernie thought about putting the gun down, one of the police looked into the window and then walked straight in. Bernie has thought they might surround the building and start a kidnapping negotiation. She had planned to ask for a taxi to the Yukon to let everyone go. "Bernie Schultz?" the policeman asked. "Who's asking? Let's take you back to Sage Hill," he said and walked straight toward her. Bernie lowered the gun that lacked bullets. Her gig was up. The police knew retirees in Calgary wouldn't give up their guns, but the retirement homes had taken away their bullets. The cashier cleared his throat. "Just for my Instagram account. Why were you trying to rob the store?" Bernie wanted to quote Willie Sutton, because that's where all the money is. But it didn't seem to fit this situation anymore. She mulled it over. The police weren't in a rush. She told the cashier, "For once, I just wanted to be in control of my own life." The cashier thought about it, then said, "The office workers that come into our store and put in complicated orders, I think have the same reason." When he noticed how many people were watching him, he added, "Not that that stereotype is representative of all people who work in offices." In the language of her own generation, Bernie explained that she also didn't mean any offense to anyone by her words and actions that day. "Sorry," she said. She left the store with the police, one holding her shoulder in case she tripped on the front step.